Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and today's book talk, The Woman I Think About at Night, with Mia Kankimäki and moderator Heli Sirviö. I would also like to thank Elena Albeck Literature Agency and Simon & Schuster for helping making this event possible. Also happening virtually at Scandinavia House, we have started today our Nordic and Baltic Oscar contender series. These screenings are films chosen by the Nordic and Baltic countries to compete for the Oscar nomination for Best International Feature Film. The Finnish contender Tova, a biopic based on the life of the great Finnish author and artist Tova Jansson, will be screening next weekend. All information can be found at the website at scandinaviahouse.org. Please do feel free to ask questions in the chat box located on the bottom of your screen. We'll ask these questions towards the end of the program. Mia Kankimäki has worked with books all her life. She has a master's degree in comparative literature from the University of Helsinki. She has worked as a copywriter and editor at various publishing houses. Her travels to Tanzania, Kenya, Italy, and Japan in the footsteps of inspirational historical female figures, fearless explorers, gifted writers, and passionate artists inspired this book, The Woman I Think About at Night, Traveling the Paths of My Heroes. Heli Sirviö is a lecturer of Finnish language and culture at Columbia University in New York. She holds a master's degree from Helsinki University Theatre Academy and has had a broad lifelong interest in literature and film. So please do welcome Heli and Mia.
Thank you. Thank you. So on my behalf, it's really nice to be moderating. Thank you for inviting me to do this, Kyle. And Mia, it's absolutely a pleasure to get this chance to talk to you about the book. I found it startlingly beautiful. The language, even in the English translation, is just fabulous. And the story of the book, the journey that you are on, I feel resonates very strongly with me, and I'm just excited. So it's really nice to get to have this chance to talk with you. So for everybody who has joined us, so what we were thinking about is that we are going to read from the very beginning of the book, The Women I Think About at Night. So Mia will be reading in Finnish, and then I will be going into the same passage in English, and then we will start talking about the book. So Mia, do you want to go first?
Yes, so I will read from the Finnish book, and it's not too long. Try to hang in there. Yönaiset, tunnustus. Minä olen M. Olen 43-vuotias. Olen vuosien varrella lukemattomina öinä ajatellut naisia, eikä se liity mitenkään seksiin. Olen ajatellut naisia niinä unettomina öinä, kun elämä, miesasiat, asenne ovat tolaltaan, ja tuntuu, ettei se kauhea sudenhetki pääty ikinä. Noina öinä olen kerännyt itselleni näkymätöntä historiallisten naisten henkivartiokaartia, suojeluspyhymyksiä, jotka johdattavat eteenpäin. Näiden inspiroivien yönaisten elämä ei ole kulkenut perinteistä reittiä. He ovat rikkoneet rajoja ja tehneet asioita, joita heiltä ei ole odotettu. Monet heistä ovat taiteilijoita ja kirjailijoita, niitä joiden työ on yksinäistä ja sisäänpäin kääntynyttä. Useimmilla ei ole ollut perhettä tai lapsia, ja heidän miessuhteensa ovat olleet epäsovinnaisia. Monet ovat matkustelleet tai muuttaneet uuteen kulttuuriin ja tehneet suuria elämänmuutoksia vielä kypsällä iällä. Jotkut ovat asuneet koko ikänsä äitiensä kanssa. Monet ovat kärsineet sairauksista ja mielenterveysongelmista, mutta kaikki he ovat seuranneet intohimoaan ja tehneet omia valintojaan aikansa odotuksista piittaamatta. Nämä esikuvalliset naiset olisivat minun suunnitelmani B, se jonka ottaisin käyttöön, jos kaikki muu menisi pieleen. Yksi naisista on 1000 vuotta sitten Kiotossa elänyt hovinainen ja kirjailija Sei Shonakon, josta kirjoitin ensimmäisen kirjani. Mutta heitä on muitakin. Ajattelen öisin Frida Kahloa, jonka elämäkerran luin 18-vuotiaana ja joka muutti käsitykseni naiseudesta. Ajattelen Georgia O'Keeffeä, joka päätyi yksin Uuden-Meksikon aavikolle maalaamaan puhvelinkalloja ja teki ensimmäisen maailmanympärimatkansa yli 70-vuotiaana. Ajattelen japanilaista Yayoi Kusamaa, joka päätti ryhtyä taiteilijaksi ja kirjoitti Georgia O'Keeffelle kysyäkseen neuvoa, joka sittemmin 60-luvun New Yorkin taidemaailmaa ravisteltuaan palasi Tokioon ja pyysi päästä mielisairaalaan asumaan. Ajattelen Karen Blixenia, joka lähti miehen perässä Afrikkaan ja päätyi johtamaan yksin maatilaa. Ajattelen Jane Austenia, joka uudisti romaanitaiteen, vaikka asui naimattomana vanhempiensa vintillä Englannin maaseudulla. Ajattelen Edo-kauden Japanissa elänyttä runoilijataiteilija Emma Saikoota, jonka tyyneys tuo lopulta suden hetkellä unen. Mietin, mistä nämä naiset ammensivat rohkeutensa. Miten he neuvoisivat minua, jos voisimme tavata? Ja ennen kaikkea, voisinko lähteä tutkimusmatkalle heidän jäljilleen?
Okay, now you can hear me. So thank you, Mia. I will go into the English version of the book, and I will read the same passage from the very first chapter, very first pages. Night Women, a confession. I'm M. I'm 43 years old. On countless nights over the years, I've thought about women, and it has nothing at all to do with sex. I've thought about women on those sleepless nights when my life, my love, or my attitude is skewed, and it seems there is no end to the dark night of my soul. On those nights, I have gathered an invisible honor guard of historical women, guardian angels, to lead the way. The lives of these inspiring night women have not followed traditional paths. They have transgressed boundaries and expectations. Many of them are artists and writers, people doing lonely, introverted work. Most have not had families or children, and their relationships with men have been unconventional. Many have traveled in or moved to foreign countries, made massive life changes at an advanced age. Some have lived with their mothers their entire lives. Some have suffered from diseases and mental disorders, but all of them have followed their passions and made their own choices. These exemplary women have been my plan B, the one I'll adopt if everything else goes to hell. One of the women is Sei Shonagon, a writer and court lady who lived 1,000 years ago in Kyoto, about whom I wrote my first book. But there are many others. Some nights I lie awake thinking about Frida Kahlo, whose biography I read when I was 18. It transformed how I thought about womanhood. Other nights I think about Georgia O'Keeffe, who wound up alone in New Mexico, deserts, painting buffalo skulls and making her first trip around the world when she was in her 70s. I think about Yayoi Kusama, a Japanese woman who, deciding to become an artist, wrote to Georgia O'Keeffe to ask her advice, and later, after shaking up the New York art world in the 60s, returned to Tokyo and asked to be allowed to live in a psychiatric hospital. I think of Karen Blixen, who followed her husband to Africa and ended up running a farm on her own. I think of Jane Austen, who, though she lived unmarried in her parents' attic in the English countryside, transformed the art of the novel. I think of the poet-artist Emma Saiko, who lived in Japan in the Edo period. It's her calm that finally brings sleep to the dark night of my soul. I wonder where these women found their courage. What advice would they give me if me? And above all, could I go exploring in their footsteps? Mia, just the very beginning of this book, when I first started reading it, I think I have quoted it and I've taken it out and I have read that out loud, probably to 14 or 15 people. I find it fascinating that there are these women from different historical periods who visit you at nights. But how did that happen? How did you start getting these visitations? Have you been studying these women and then you end up thinking about them, or do they just arrive to you and come to visit even if you don't invite them?
The women I mentioned here in this first section of the book were the night women I thought about at first, and they were all quite well known, as you could see. But when I actually started to write this project, I wanted to find some women who were not that well known, and I just began going through books and doing research in library. And what I discovered was that there are so many interesting historical women I had never even heard of, like literally hundreds of them. And there were then several criteria how I chose them. I think the main point was that I was looking for personal guidance for my life. So I chose women I could somehow connect to on a personal level. And also I was especially interested in traveling and writing and making art. So I also chose women who had been writers and artists and travelers. But the other thing was that I surely wanted to write about inspiring women, but I also wanted to travel. So I started listing places where I wanted to travel, like East Africa and Italy and Japan. And then I tried to find women who had lived in or traveled to those places so that I would have an excuse to go there. And of course, Karen Blixen was very familiar to me, and she was one of my original night women, and she was my first choice since I desperately wanted to go to East Africa. But for example, the Italian Renaissance time women artists like Sofonis Pangisola and Artemisia Gentileschi, who I'm writing about, I didn't know beforehand, that's all. But I wanted very much to go to Florence and write something about Renaissance art. So I just traveled there and tried to find something I could write about. And finally, then I found these women. But I think the most surprising and most wonderful finding for me were the 19th century women explorers, like Isabella Bird and Ida Pfeiffer and Mary Kingsley. I just found their pictures in a coffee table book and learned that they had been traveling around the world alone in these black Victorian dresses of theirs. And as soon as I saw their photos, which were so crazy, it was just love at first sight, and I knew I had to write about them. I don't know, actually in the English version doesn't have these photos I have in my original Finnish versions. I don't know if you can see these, but who could not write about these women?
Wow.
Knowing that they
Wow.
are explorers.
Yeah, and just to imagine that they traveled alone in those dresses and everything that goes with it, and just in the time when they traveled, when it was just, it's not a plane ride of a few hours, but it can take weeks, if not months, to get to your destination. So do you have a particular one woman or women who are more favorites to you of this entire bunch of pretty special women that you're writing about?
Well, it's a horrible question, and it's always asked.
Yeah.
But the point is that all these 10 women in the book are my special favorites. As I said, when I was doing research, I was just amazed how many interesting women I could find, women who had done some remarkable things and had been well recognized at the time, but who had since been all forgotten. And I really struggled with leaving out so many of them. So this is my absolute top 10. But as I said, I've been asked this before. So if I'm forced to answer, I would say it would be Mary Kingsley, just this woman I just showed you, this one, who was this British spinster who in the 1890s traveled alone to West Africa and paddled down the rivers in that Victorian outfit and collected fish samples and learned about the customs of the locals, and later she wrote 2 best-selling books about her journeys and research, and she was just a delightful person. Her books are very funny even today, and she has this wonderful self-ironic sense of humor, so I think she could be my favorite, all of these.
Now I want to read her books as well, that you're promoting that.
Yeah, they are really fresh.
Yeah.
even today.
Yeah, I believe that. And British writers usually have a very good sense of language and you know, the wit, the dry humor that they can bring
Yes,
into
the
it.
humor is,
yeah.
for example, one of her advice for women solo travelers in Africa was to, if someone asks, always say that you're looking for your husband, because it was such a strange sight to see a woman traveling alone, and everyone she met was going to ask anyway where her husband was, and if she said she didn't have one, everything got very difficult and strange, and so better just always say you're looking for him and point to the direction where you're going anyway. And I think this is a good advice for any woman, even today when traveling alone, I've noticed.
Yeah, I've noticed the same. Yeah. You did your journeys because you traveled around the world, following in the footsteps of these night women in different countries. Was there a specific question, something that was driving you to want to travel and to chase these women to their worlds? Was there a question in your mind that you were searching an answer for? And if yes, so did you find one from these women? Did you find what you were looking for?
Short answer, yes, I did.
Yeah.
I think the basic point of this project was, like already in my first book, in which I traveled to Kyoto in search of Seishun Nakon, this court lady who lived there 1,000 years ago, that I wanted to compare my own life with the experiences of these historical women on a very concrete level. For example, I wanted to know how it was to travel and how it was to write and to make art 100 or even 400 or even 1,000 years ago for a woman. And how has a woman's life changed, or has it? And what could I learn from them? And I think in the end, the basic question was how to live a meaningful life as a 40-something single woman with no kids. How to live a meaningful life if you choose to do something else than the norm is. And I got many answers, some very concrete advice for traveling and for packing the suitcase and how to go around the world with only one handbag, like Nelly Bly did, and how to get money for traveling and how to dress and how to write a book and how to manage your things as a freelance artist and how to promote your work and all that very concrete things. Many things have not changed at all, actually.
Yeah.
But I think in addition to this concrete advice, I think one of the most important things I learned was that despite of these amazing things that these women did, there were really no superwomen at all. For example, with the explorers, it was very empowering for me to see that despite the amazingly rough journeys they made, they were just ordinary women. They were middle-aged spinsters like me, and they didn't have much money like me, and they suffered from headaches and depressions and insomnia, which is very familiar too. And they were sometimes afraid and frustrated and didn't know what to do, but still they found a way to do the things that they wanted to do. So for me, it was important to realize that firstly, you actually can live a meaningful life in many different ways. And you don't need to be a superwoman to do it. So it's really up to me if I'm restricting myself with my fears and insecurities and the expectations of other people, or do I dare to live the life as I wish? I think that was the most important thing I learned.
Is it now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, sorry about that. So I try and mute myself when Mia is talking, and then now I just realized that, oh, well, I had muted myself. So there is this big question that I think, I don't know if it's just because you and I are about the same age, so I don't know if it's a generational thing that we feel in our 30s and 40s, especially when we have made already certain choices in life, that there are pressures of starting to look at our values and those choices and the outcomes of those choices. But I feel that that's the one thing about your journeys that resonates very strongly with me, is that question, is that when we have all these freedoms, we are Western women, we have education, and we are not rich, but we have much, much more possibilities than many of our sisters around the world who do not have the liberties that we do. So then what do you do with those liberties? How do you then build that meaningful life? So it's really, it really resonates strongly through the book for me. And you had me in tears in many points there, feeling like really going deep inside myself and looking into my values, my structures, my choices in life. Which segues me actually to the next part of Karen Blixen, because there's Karen Blixen is the first lady of Your Night Women, of whom we read and get to know her much better than what we even do know about based on her own writings, and world known, one of the really iconic writers from Denmark. What we also in the film with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, I think that the big love affair in between Karen Blixen and her dream man, Dennis Finch Hatton, is described as something dreamy and amazing. It's that love larger than life. And then once we start getting to know Karen Blixen in her footsteps with your journeys, we find out that actually it was not that blissful. She was depressed. She locked herself into her bedroom for days and days and just stayed in bed and cried whenever Dennis was not there. And Dennis was one of those men who does not want to commit. He has a very, very big difficulty of admitting to love. And that was one of the big questions that really strikes me on multiple levels. I've spoken with women who are my friends who have boyfriends who won't commit to them. And I have looked into the cloth of New York City, where, you know, it's just a dating paradise, basically. So nobody ever needs to commit because, you know, there is so much good fruit, so to say, hanging in the tree. But at the same time, does it make a meaningful life? And then the sacrifice that Karen Blixen makes in this book that we read about is that she keeps on pretending to Dennis that she does not love him, she does not need him, but she is absolutely dedicated only to him. And that's the part that I would like to read from the book. So we go into page 50 of the book, and this is Karen Blixen's story about her love to Dennis Finch Hatton. Even now, Dennis was mostly away for almost 2 years, but whenever he did come around, Karen's depression vanished as if by magic. In August 1923, Dennis decided to go up his home bungalow and moved his things into Karen's house. But then on, he spent time at Karen's between safaris, a week or two time between months-long absences. Karen had a bookcase built in her house for Dennis's enormous book collection, and Dennis brought wines and records from Europe. And if Karen was out writing when he arrived, he would open the doors and play Schubert on the gramophone at full volume to let her know that he was there. Evenings, they would sit by a blazing fire on the hearth, and Karen would tell stories. One day they agreed that they would both be buried in a certain slope of Gong Hills that could be seen from the farm. Karen was beside herself with joy. To her brother, Karen wrote, Dennis Finch Hatton has been staying here for some time and is probably staying for another week. And I have been really completely happy, indeed, so happy that it is worth having lived and suffered, been ill, and had all the sharis to have lived for this week. I understand, Karen. If you can just be with that amazing, the most amazing man, how lucky one is to have that, nothing else matters. But she also urged her brother never to tell anyone what kind of effect Dennis had on her. By the way, if I should die and you should happen to meet him afterward, you must never let him know that I have written to you like this about him. For Karen played it cool with Dennis. The conditions were stringent. No commitments, no demands. Dennis was happy at the farm, but he came only when he wanted to come. Dennis didn't believe in marriage, and maybe declarations of love and the tiniest hints of codependency made him feel anxious. Karen knew that if she showed Dennis just how important he was to her, if she hinted that, in fact, her whole life depended on him, he might get a whiff of her desperation, like some wild animal on the savannah, and vanish forever. So she adapted. She made Dennis's fear of commitment a virtue, even wrote a critical essay against marriage, praised the love of parallels, and began to despise those lovers who gazed into each other's eyes and took possession of each other's lives. That's a jarring passage to read. I feel there is something that in me, knowing that how much I personally have admired Karen Blixen, at the same time feels disappointed and very, very well understands her. It's like that trading that we do about our self-worth and then the worth of having love. And then, as you said, also in the society's eyes, the need to have a man. So how did you reflect on that when you realized that she had been doing that trade-off? Like she was absolutely madly in love with him, but she was playing it cool and pretending that, yeah, I don't care about you. I don't need you. How does that resonate when you're writing about it?
Well, I can totally relate. I was very disappointed too. I was really, well, to be honest with Karen, I was disappointed with so many things because if you read the memoir, she seems totally different, but when you read her letters from Africa, the picture changes. And I think I had booked my flights to Tanzania, and when I read about this, and I was like, the whole project is ruined because how can I think of her as this exemplary role model or anything? But I don't know. I think I still have to understand her because she was very conflicted herself too. I think at some lonely moments she wanted to have a family, and she envied her sister's easy family life in Denmark, and complained about why she was doomed to be alone in Africa. And live the difficult life of hers, but then she also wanted exactly that kind of life and thought it to be somehow grand or bigger than other people's lives. So I think she always very much wanted to be that independent and strong woman, but then sometimes, or quite often, she just failed and she couldn't be that ideal knight woman she wanted to be. And it's very recognizable. I think we all struggle with that. And and I also have to say that I found some other things that made Karen again a knight woman of mine, because I was very impressed when I realized how in the end she was able to somehow rise above this, and she really learned how to play with the cards she was dealt and to use this life with no family as an opportunity. And I think it's really remarkable that after all those 18 difficult years in Africa, when she was finally forced to move back to Denmark, and she was very ill, and Dennis had died, all was lost, the farm was sold, and she had no money, and she had to move back to her mother's house in Denmark. But at that point, when she was 46 years old, she was still able to reinvent herself and to start something new, because it was only then she started to write these books, and which made her famous then. And she actually started a new career at 46, and this I find very inspiring, and for this I'm also willing to forgive her everything else.
Yeah. And I think that there is something about her story specifically that I think was very refreshing and yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry, Mia, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. Yes, because it just froze for a second. So I was thinking, I'm like, did I lose the connection? So about Karen's story. So regardless, yes, of the disappointments throughout her years in Africa, and the fact that, well, nobody is a superwoman. Everybody goes through their ups and downs, and then when she had that biggest down of all, she lost her farm, she lost Dennis, she had lost her husband, she was sick, and she had no money. And she had to move back in with mom at 46. And then suddenly that was the biggest reinvention of her life, when everything burned down. And then she became the writer for what the world knows her to be. So it's just somehow super empowering also, that part of her.
Yeah.
How about then the lady who was most resonating with me of here is Sofonisba, who is the first woman artist that we know about.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up finding her? What was your relationship with Sofonisba?
Well, first I have to ask you, because this is always very interesting, why is she a favorite of yours? It's always really interesting to know. It's surprising who is resonating to whom.
I don't. Yeah, and I was surprised too. I always thought that it would be Karen Blixen when I was just looking at the list of different women, maybe because everybody knows about her. Maybe because she was a Nordic woman who went alone to the other side of the world to restart her life. And I feel that in a certain way, I did that myself when I was 29 and I moved here to New York. but then it's not. And suddenly for Sofonisba, I guess it's the trailblazer, the person who does what you're not expected to do. You're an artist, you're breaking barriers, you're somehow doing something so unconventional or unexpected.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there is bravery in it. I think that it's just a lot of, well, honesty is brave. So I guess that it's her honesty to herself, to her intuition, to that something calling towards. I don't know. Maybe it's that why I'm so intrigued by her. Yeah.
Yeah, she was indeed the daughter of a noble family and became the first woman first famous woman artist in Italy in the 16th century.
Yeah.
I think for me the most important thing of her are her self-portraits. There are many of them, and at that time it was a new thing to have a self-portrait, and it was very rare to see a self-portrait of a woman because there were no
and you also mentioned right, and then you also mentioned that because mirrors had just become good quality very recently, so for a person to be able to look at themselves in the mirror and to make a truthful picture was also very new, and then she was really inventing that as well. So, yeah,
and she actually wrote to the portraits that this is drawn, this is truthful, a truthful image because it's drawn from a mirror. But I think what intrigues me is the way she paints herself. She's so very modest and still very confident and very calm and very plain. No fancy hairdos or dresses like all the other noble women of that time. And maybe she has a paintbrush in her hand or something like that, and she's like she's just calmly decided that this is what she's going to do, no matter what, that women are not supposed to be artists, but she's going to paint. And well, she did it. She ended up to paint and make a living in the Spanish court for years.
Yeah. I guess that it is that plain, as you say, plain honesty, something of the strength in that she is not pretending at all. She is just who she is and goes towards her true self.
Yes.
I guess, it's because all of these women are so fascinating and they have done something that was not expected in their time. And because they are not super women, and we find out that they are really human with their errors and flaws and peculiarities and addictions, and everything that makes them human and whole suddenly also makes them very interesting, because we see them very bare and very raw, like we find ourselves, I guess.
Yes.
So would you like to read in Finnish about the Night Women's advice? Because at the end of each chapter, each Night Woman has advice. So whose advice would you like to read?
Well, shall I read Sophonisba's then?
Okay, yeah.
Okei. Yönaisten neuvoja. Jos tiedät, mitä haluat tehdä, tee se. Jollei kukaan tuntemasi ole tehnyt sitä koskaan ennen, aina parempi. Merkitse kaikkeen ylpeästi suurin kirjaimin. Minä tein tämän. Mainosta osaamistasi. Levitä käyntikorttejasi. Kuvissa katso suoraan kameraan. Ole vilpitön, tyyni, itsevarma ja ihana.
Wow. That brings tears to my eyes. It's a beautiful, beautiful passage. I'll read that same one in English. And we are in the English book. It's page 303. And this is the end of Sophonisba's chapter. Night Women's advice. If you know what you want to do, do it. If no one you know has ever done it before, so much the better. Mark everything you do in big, proud letters. I did this. Advertise your skills. Distribute your calling cards. In the pictures, look straight at the camera. Be sincere, calm, self-confident, and wonderful. Wow. I don't know why, but this is absolutely just brings tears to my eyes every time I read that. And I think I've read it now 3 times. Mia, thank you for this. I've realized that we've gone already 5 minutes over because Kyle was asking us to keep this at 40 minutes so that everybody who is our audience also gets a chance to chat with you, ask their questions. So Kyle, if you want to
Yes,
take the floor.
sure. I do have one question here already from Ethelene. Can you talk about your writing process? For example, how long did it take you to write it, and how did you decide to weave in your story with theirs? She's enjoying the novel very much.
Well, thank you for the question. My writing process is very long. This one I wrote for, I think, 4.5 years. And it's very chaotic too. Firstly, I'm doing research. I'm reading a lot of material about these women and trying to write some kind of essays about them. And then, of course, I'm traveling and I'm writing a travel diary at all times. And then when I have a lot of material, I kind of try to start to put it all together. And when I start the book, I have absolutely no idea how it's going to be because it's an expedition for myself too. I wanted to find some interesting women and I wanted to travel, but I have no idea what's going to happen and if I can pull this off finally. So the writing process, when I had all the material, took maybe 2 years at least. And it's a lot of editing and cutting, and also it's only at that stage when I start to understand what it's all about and what I want to know and what is the story here and what are the questions. It's a very slow process to start to understand what I'm doing, which is, I don't know if it's just me or if someone else would do it much quicker. But the reason why I'm taking my story and their story is that I really want to compare our lives. I want to compare how a woman's life is now and how it was in the history and how it was to these women. And also what I noticed in my first book when I wrote about this Japanese court lady who lived 1,000 years ago, I did the kind of same thing. And if I'm comparing our lives, it's somehow the distance somehow disappears. Like with these women too, I started to feel that I can talk to them like they were my friends, and you start to see the connections and the similarities. And I think it's just interesting to compare different eras, different cultures, and there's always surprisingly a lot in common with our lives.
Thank you. This one is from Madeline. In the way you followed in the footsteps of women travelers, is if someone were to follow in your footsteps, where would you like them to go?
Well, first of all, visit Helsinki, my hometown, of course. I think in my books I have been to all my favorite places, like Japan is one of my favorites. Kyoto is a very important city to me, and I love Italy, the Rome and Florence, and of course I love the East African savanna. So like I said, I think I chose the women and the stories of my book based on where I want to travel. So it's a kind of happy situation. And that's about all I do. So there are no other places. My life is just work.
And this one is from Barbara. Is there a common characteristics or quality for all these women? And was this life theirs? And was this life their first choice, or was it their plan B?
It depends. There are, well, I think for many of them it was plan B, or there's some, for example, for the explorers of the 19th century, many of them, they first had to be wives and make children, and when their children were adults, then they could leave and travel and do the thing they finally wanted to do, and they wanted to do it all the time, but they had to do the duties at first. And for example, Mary Kingsley was she had to take care of her sick mother for her life until her parents died. She was a little over 30 then, and then she had the chance. Then she decided suddenly, I will go to West Africa and be an explorer. So for many, it was a kind of duty first thing. And I think also one thing common for many women, which I personally like very much, is the fact that many of them have made big changes in their lives later in their lives, like in their 40s and even 50s, 60s or 70s. So it's by no means that you must know at your 20s how your life is going to be, but you can take a totally different direction later on, and I find that very inspiring.
Well, thank you so much. That looks like it's it for the questions, unless anything pops up quite quickly. The book is available in the US right now, so do check out your local bookstores or online to purchase the novel. Thank you so much, Mia, for joining us. Thank you so much for Heli for moderating us. It was a wonderful pleasure to have you all here. We do have a book club that we do once a month. We'll be meeting next Tuesday to discuss Jason Diake's memoirs. So you can find that information online as well. So so thank you again, and I hope to see everyone, either in a virtual world or a very soon physical world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, all.